Welcome to the Unblock Yourself podcast, our podcast where we have conversations either together or with people who are chasing their dreams and living an intentional and unblocked life. Our guest today is Kyle Ferrigan. Kyle is a physiotherapist who has not only worked with almost every member of our family, but also with professional athletes from the NHL and CFL and a wide range of other sports. And while he spends his days helping people recovering from injuries and get back to doing what they love, this conversation ended up being about so much more than just physiotherapy. We talk about identity, setbacks, resilience, and what he's learned from helping people through some of the hardest and darkest times of their lives. Kyle also shares the story of a major setback early in his own career that completely changed the direction of where he is today. We definitely got more than we bargained for in this conversation because honestly, I can't remember the last time Kyle and I had a conversation that wasn't full of sarcasm or jabs. And there's a few of those in here, but we kept it on the rails. And it turns out that there are a lot of parallels between recovering from an injury and a setback, building a business, or simply trying to become a better version of yourself. We hope you enjoy this conversation with Kyle Ferrigan. Kyle Ferrigan, it's great that you're here. Welcome to, this is a podcast. I don't know that that's something that you have listened to or done before, but it's a recording and it's going to be things that people will find helpful and useful.
That's the funniest introduction. I feel like he knew coming in it was a podcast. But just as a reminder, Kyle, in case you didn't, this is a podcast.
This is slightly aware. Yeah.
All of our conversations have been medically focused, though, where you've been hovering over me, providing treatment to me. Right. So this is a different context. So I just want to level set.
That's good.
Right from the get-go.
That's good.
Okay. But we're so glad that you're here and that you've chosen to join us instead of, I think, spending time with an NHL star this afternoon.
Potentially.
Yeah. So we appreciate that and take that as a huge compliment. We'll have to talk a bit about that. But maybe we can just start with how we met and got introduced.
Are you going to tell the pink shorts story? This is what I want to know.
Well, I think you've retold it, so I'm going to invite you to retell it. But I think it was all rooted in, at the start, me tearing my Achilles after a really heroic ski ride
Yes.
And saving 2 children, and then it goes.
Sure.
The story's developed.
Yeah, it has
nice.
enhanced over time. And then that led to us getting introduced and you then ultimately saving my Achilles. So but then there was a pink short story. Maybe you can just tell us about that.
So, I guess the story kind of all comes back to the Achilles tear and kind of getting a text from a surgeon who you had known, and they said, hey, I have somebody super special to me that we want to make sure that he gets better. So I'm going to send him your way. And so we worked together for 6 to 9 months in that time frame. We were best friends. Yeah, close to that. Mm-hmm. And then, so worked through rehabilitating the Achilles and basically taking you from the point where you can't put weight on it all the way back to, I want to say, elite sport. I don't know if that's a little bit of a stretch, but basically covering the span of going from kind of not able to walk, put pressure on it, to getting back to all the things you like and love to do. And then kind of through that, got to get to know you a little bit and kind of figure out what you're all about. And part of that kind of leads into the pink short story. And so to kind of do a quick version of it, I had gone to a cottage weekend with a friend of mine and went home thinking nothing of it. It was on a lake. And you showed up one day wearing some pink shorts. And I said, are you wearing a bathing suit, Greg? And you said, what makes you think it's a bathing suit? And I said, I'm pretty sure I have that same bathing suit. And you said, do you? And I said, are you sure? And to which I then learned that you had confiscated my shorts by virtue of me leaving them at the cottage, and decided that would be really, really funny if you wore my bathing suit into the clinic.
Yes.
And so from that, I was forced to cut the liner out. And instead of burning them, we washed them and then made them the clinic's punishment for people who forgot to bring appropriate lower body wear. And so they would wear the pink shorts, and then the story kind of lived on and continued to spiral.
I think it's great. If anyone shows up to your clinic
yes.
and in need of shorts, they're going to get a pair of pink shorts that are formerly yours, formerly mine, maybe formerly others who've worn, many others who've worn these pink shorts.
So good. I'm actually really excited. I don't think I've ever been around when you guys have had like a serious conversation. So I'm excited to get into some like deeper topics and see how you guys do, because I think your entire relationship and anything you talk about has a lot of sarcasm in it.
There's a lot of sarcasm. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is going to be interesting.
It's basically the sisterhood of the traveling shorts, so or brotherhood, I guess.
Yes.
So yeah, so those have been finally put to rest now, so you can
Really
be rest assured that they're in a good place. But
okay.
Did you burn them?
I don't know if they were burned, but they were definitely disposed of somewhere.
That's too bad. That's too bad.
Awesome.
We
Love
should,
it.
Yeah, we should move on to this. The more
Yes.
serious
So let's
Yeah.
pivot. We're going to pivot away from the pink shorts, but I love that story. I think it's very good. I think you told Cole that story as well, our son, when he started seeing you. So it's great. He also loved that story.
And I guess at some point we had to address who you treated is basically it's like everyone in our family.
We'll
at
get
some
there.
point. Yeah,
Yes.
It's going to get true.
We need a lot of treatment in our family. So I guess just to pivot a bit, you have mentioned, I think to both of us in separate times, you've like said, hey, when am I going to be on the pod? Can I be on the podcast soon? I don't think you said it quite like that. It wasn't like you pushing for it, but it was like, you're like, I got some stories to tell. And I know that you have a story about a setback or something that had happened. I think it was like years back, and it is related to school, I believe, that put you on a different path. So curious, what's that story?
Yeah, so kind of some context before the story kind of began when I was telling it to you guys. There's some like things that predate that kind of like go into this whole kind of concept of school success, failure, kind of rerouting of paths, kind of like landing where you kind of naturally are supposed to be rather than maybe where you intend to be off the hop. And so dating back to high school, like in high school, I played high-level hockey, was really focused on sports, being with friends, doing all the things that a normal high school age guy focuses on, and school kind of took a back seat in a certain sense, but was always like a decent student. So didn't have great study habits, didn't work super hard on studying.
Big shocker there, folks.
And now I get to treat your leg. Yeah. And so coming from that, when hockey and sports, I kind of like started to look at it all and see where it was going. I didn't want to be chasing a dream that I didn't think was going to happen. So things started to get a little bit more realistic with sports. I said, okay, I want to go to school. I really want to go into kinesiology because I had gotten to know through playing hockey, I had the benefit of having a team physio in our AAA team in Toronto. And so got to know kind of what the world was all about, got to be in the clinic. And truthfully, at that time, I thought the coolest part was that the physios got to roll around on a stool and then watch the Blue Jays games midday. So I was like, this seems like a great job.
You're like, I can get paid for this?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I can do that well. So after that, I basically said, okay, I want to do kinesiology. And so I went to my guidance counselor at the time, was my volleyball coach. And he looked at me and looked at my marks and he said, Kyle, your marks are good, but kinesiology is like a whole nother level. And he's like, to be honest, if you want to get in kinesiology, you're probably coming back for a fifth year. I said, I'm definitely not coming back for a fifth year. So I was like, what else can I take? So I literally like opened the pamphlet home, looked through like all the different like programs and ended up just like pointing at psychology. And I was like, that kind of sounds interesting. And if you truly asked me like what it was all about, I would have had no clue at the time. I was like, I'm definitely not coming back to high school. So ended up basically applying to psychology out of it after getting rejected to get into kinesiology originally. Ended up really falling in love with that kind of path. And when I was in school, I was like, this is awesome. And at one point considered like whether I'd pursue doing like sports psychology afterwards. So I ended up doing a 4-year degree in psychology, originally with the intention to try to switch into kin, and basically said, kibosh that. I'm just going to continue with the psychology path. From doing the 4-year psychology degree, ended up getting into physio school out of the psychology degree. And I thought that's where like kind of the failures would end on the school front. Made it through physio school, did really well, I'd say, in the program. Ended up doing the national exam. And at this point, when you graduate physio school, you got residency status. So you can work under like a temporary designation with supervision. So I got hired on at a really, really good opportunity in Kitchener, was working at a clinic, had a full caseload. I was killing it from a standpoint of kind of client satisfaction. I thought my job was going awesome. Wrote this national exam, didn't think twice about it. I was like, I did great on it. And so a month later, opened the exam results on a whim on a weekend. Again, not very concerned at that point, and realized that I had failed my national exam. And I checked it 3 times, and I was like, definitely says failed. And so I had to break the news.
And you would have thought like you felt like you'd studied, you prepared, like you went in feeling
like definitely shocked because I was not prepared for that. And usually the national exam, I'd say, would reflect what your kind of marks in school were, because it's supposed to be a reflection of kind of the program, the curriculum, and all that stuff. So if you get a 90 in school, you should probably end up with something similar. And so for whatever reason that year, there's a huge fail increase. So it went, usually it's like 90 to 95% pass rate. It dropped down to like 63% that year. And there's a bunch of potential reasons for that. But in relation to like what I was doing work wise, I ended up having to like phone my boss, phone his wife, and he didn't pick up the phone the first time I tried to call him, tell him. And so I called his wife, who was the receptionist, and I said, like, Amanda, like, I failed my exam. And she, again, sarcastically, which is probably a lot of my relationships with people, was like laughing. And she's like, I'm driving behind a city bus for Trials College's massage therapy program. So if you want, I can read you the 1-800 number. And I was like, no, I seriously failed. And then she went silent for like a minute, and she was like, no way. And so basically we had to inform like all of our patients that I couldn't like practice. I had to retake the exam. It was going to be like a 6-month delay. And it was like the end of the world as far as like professional career at that point. And I was super upset, obviously. But the cool kind of thing, the turnaround of all of this is that they had seen some potential in me, and that they believed that I would eventually be a good physio once I could finally pass this exam. And so the surgical group, who was tied to the clinic, offered to have me come and basically help with like patient triage and help out with assessments, help kind of like make their process a little bit more efficient, try to make it so that I could come in, have a role, still get paid to do something, and keep me involved so that when I did end up passing the exam, I could stay in the clinic. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to that, I end up getting a really unique experience where I got to know all of these surgeons and doctors very, very well, and they got to know who I was, which you usually don't get that opportunity in a physio career because you're kind of treating patients. You don't have time to kind of venture into that world. And yeah, years down the road, I'd say now when I'm in like more of the sports rehab world, a lot of the kind of connections that I've built, a lot of the path that's kind of been paved from a sports rehab success, I can credit back to that time because those affiliations gave me very unique learning opportunities. I could build networks that I wouldn't have otherwise built. And I think because of that, a lot of this kind of process has kind of now played out in a very different manner than it ever would have had I not failed that exam. So kind of one of those situations where it seems like the worst thing that could happen to you at the time, but then potentially could be one of the best things that's happened to me. So
wild. What do you think your life would look like now if that didn't happen?
Hard to say. I think even,
massage therapist.
I'd probably still be at Trials College trying to pass that exam. But I think a lot of my career has maybe moved in very cool, unique, niche ways, maybe less niche than it is now. And I think some of the foundation that I built early on allowed me to kind of build into a niche, whereas I might just be kind of doing more of like the Gen Pop thing, which is fun in its own right, but just a different kind of stream. The cool part about physio as a whole is like it can look so different depending on what setting you're working in. You can work in a hospital, you can work with patients that have had a stroke, you can work with people in that have had like brain injuries, you can work with people in the ICU. There's so many different roles in a hospital. And then on the clinical side, you can do sports, more Gen Pop stuff. There's a ton of different paths. So probably one of those. But I'd say stemming back from the early part of the story with high school, always had the passion to kind of work with athletes in sports. So I probably would have continued to try to push. I think it would have been a lot harder to make it all happen though, without some of the people that have helped me along the way. So I think it's kind of interesting trying to like self-reflect and even kind of like thinking about coming on talking today that like, it's one of those scenarios where if I was to like ask myself at the start of my career, high school, I think what I'm doing now would be the goal, but almost one of those goals that you put on a pedestal, but you don't even know if you truly believe that it's possible. Kind of pinch myself a lot with like some of the people I'm able to work with. And I feel super fortunate to be able to work with those people. But a lot of things have fallen into place to make that happen. And there's a good amount of luck and like convenient timing and like being in the right place at the right time, as well as like, I think just being open to things as well. I think taking opportunities that seem like they may not have immediate value, but realizing that down the road, those things could be the thing that you credit to having a huge success or something 5-10 years later. And so I think I've left myself in opportunities that have allowed me to do that and not try to just look for like immediate gratification and opportunities. So,
yeah, I think there's something great. It is that it's a bad thing comes and it can end up being a great thing. This idea of like, there's what luck, who luck, and like all these things. You've had some great luck of who luck, like people you've connected with that have opened those doors. I think that's also just a credit to who you are and the personality you are that you create those opportunities. But I think part of the conversations that we try to have in this context is making the best of a bad situation. So I think it's a great and relevant example.
Yeah.
I'd love to go back to the psychology piece a little bit because you fell into that somewhat accidentally, but it sounds like you loved it and really enjoyed it. I guess the question is, now that you're treating people from a physio perspective, how much of the recovery is mental versus physical? And how does your training in psychology maybe help you meet people where they're at?
Yeah, I think a lot. And I think even with like in school evaluating like how it would be going into physio school out of psychology versus like a more common stream like kinesiology or like health science or something like that, it was always that it would be tougher at the start because you wouldn't have that same like backing in like physical science. But that as things continue to progress, it would become an asset because you had something in your bag that other people didn't. I think upon graduating, upon practicing, the psychology background has helped a ton. And other people don't really have that same kind of feel for some of those things. And I think, like you said, meeting people where they're at is like one part of it, but a lot of what we do is motivation, right? You're trying to like motivate, and somebody that I had talked to in the physio world at one point said that really we're like almost in sales. We're selling like and not so much selling over treatment or trying to like keep people in the clinic, but more so selling a message, right? Like you can be the smartest person in the world, have the best like tactics to make somebody improve, but if you can't get your message and convey it in a way that's like received, you're going to be ineffective. And so I think the psychology piece is huge for that on like human motivation standpoint. Also understanding that everybody's coming from such a different like part of the world and part of the community. So like how to be relatable is like another key. And I was just chatting with a patient the other day about the idea that a lot of the young athletes always think I'm younger than I am. But I said I don't credit that to looking young. I credit most of that to being relatable and being able to speak their language. And all of a sudden, if you're talking about something that they saw on TikTok and they're like, oh, how do you know about that? They immediately like kind of anchor you at a lower age. But part of that is the art of like, and in sports rehab, it's huge because you need to be relatable. But in some ways, if a patient comes in and wants to talk about Star Wars, you need to be able to like talk about Star Wars. And if a patient comes in and wants to talk sports, you have to be able to do that. So I always call it being a bit of like a social chameleon and trying to just like find a way to relate to that person so that you can connect. And I think psychology and like what I learned in that is a huge add in understanding like what gets people to that point.
So is there any training in that regard as part of physio? Do you know, like relating to people and like talking about some of that mindset piece, like is that part of the physio training, or did you pretty much get all of that from your psych?
No, I think they've done a really good job, and I think it's part of the trend in kind of just society right now to be a little bit more cognizant of some of the gray area of like differences and like in individual differences, but also finding ways to connect and convey messages to different populations. So they're definitely doing a really good job of like integrating that into the curriculum. I think because of the length of the program with physio having like a finite amount of time, a lot of it's spent on like how to put this stuff into practice, but understanding the intricacies of like, I don't know, in like my psychology degree, we went into like studies and like the evolution of how all this stuff came to be and like people in the 1900s that were going through developing these things and understanding the roots. I still think that there's some things to be learned from that. So still definitely a more robust kind of understanding that comes from psychology, but they're doing a good job in physio of like kind of making sure that the communication angle is important. And so the importance of language is another thing that's talked about a ton. And I try to be careful about it. Like one thing that just kind of comes off the tongue is people say, for example, people will say a stroke patient. And so they talk about like patient first language being important and that like you are not defined by your injury. So with Greg, for example, he wouldn't just be the Achilles patient. He'd be Greg with the Achilles injury. And so person first language. And so that was pushed a lot when I was coming out of school. And I'm assuming that it's kind of like continued to be conveyed that way. But even though it seems like it might not matter too much, or like not calling something a bad ankle, saying that like it's recovering. And we always kind of joke about it because most of the patients are young and like, no, it's my bad ankle. But in practice, like continuing to think of it as like, no, this is recovering. Like it has a set point that's much further along rather than something that's damaged and like less than whole.
Right. Yeah.
I think we're going to dig into that a lot more, actually.
I think being relatable, that makes so much sense to me, especially for sports, right? You have to like talk the talk. You walk the walk, you play sports, like all of that. So that's really relatable. One thing I like thinking about is identity and how much somebody's identity is wrapped up in like the things they do, their profession, athletes, for example, or Cole, as an example. So our 15-year-old son played sports his whole life and just tore his ACL. So you've been treating him since February. It's been going great. He had reconstruction surgery, but he like lost a lot of his identity. So I have to imagine like that's such a mental load for, I mean, he's 15, but if there's, a 20-year-old athlete that's, I don't know, in the NHL or gets this injury and can't play sports for a year, like curious how you can help to manage that.
I think, and this is going to kind of, just to make a relatable comment, that like even when we were talking earlier about the idea that to kind of persevere through failure and kind of like reframe it and find opportunity, I often talk to young athletes about the idea that like whether or not they realize that it's coming or how long it's going to be, that if they're a good athlete when they're young, they're eventually going to get to a point where their identity has to shift. And I always kind of jokingly say that you can choose to be, when you're like 35, 45, you can be the person who talks about how they were a great athlete in high school and every story you have is about how cool you were when you were playing like grade 10 high school football and won a championship. Or you can be kind of form a new identity that you're proud of. And the same things that go into making you a really good athlete make you good at life. And I think like being able to like show up when it's hard, being able to like take criticism and take it constructively and all those things. The same reason that you hear a lot of people say that like hiring athletes is like a preference because they have a lot of intangible skills that aren't taught in other realms. I think the identity piece of it becomes important because you can reframe your identity. As far as injury-specific identity, helping people through that, I think just maybe voicing it and bringing it up with people and kind of shedding light on it and that's a real thing is important, similar to like a lot of the kind of talk now about trying to, whether it's like just speaking to mental health and creating awareness that people are going through that. I think once people are able to like reflect and recognize that that's a thing, that's important, but also often relate and make the joke that athletes are a lot like border collies, and when you don't let them run, they're going to go stir crazy. And so I think one of the biggest things, you take their identity away, but you also take their ability away to like exert themselves physically. So whether that's like from an emotional side, staying involved in like their friend group and being like, yeah, like try to maximize, go do this, this, and this, but just be careful when you're doing it, putting some parameters around that. But as far as exercise, like even though it's a knee rehab for an ACL, I try to get most of the athletes doing upper body work, trying to like do what cardio they can do. And as soon as they're able to like swim or they're able to go on walks, like trying to maximize what they can do to exert themselves so that they take care of that need, both physically and emotionally.
From my perspective, I think my identity isn't shaped around being an athlete as much as you've built me up to be that way, which I appreciate every time I come and see you. But a huge part of my identity is it's recreational. Like it is the water skiing where I got injured, and it's the biking and just generally being active. And I do remember about the care and treatment that we went through. I think you reinforcing what the options were that I could do. The upper body workout was great for a cardio burn or things that I hadn't thought about. And I think opening doors to other possibilities is a really useful treatment tool that you use. And I think you've had that as well. We've seen that with Cole. Like he's starting to play guitar now. He's found other outlets and other interests that have lit up.
Yeah, and I think even like, I mean, in terms of physical clinical construction of like how my clinic is situated, it's very much almost like a locker room feel where you've got like open concept tables. There's kind of like lounge chairs in there so that people will come in and chat, and you can also see through those big glass windows into the gym. And it's not coincidental that like people will come in, start conversation. And I said this coming out of school that like I always wanted when I started a clinic to make it feel more like a barber shop than a medical office, and that I wanted it to be somewhere where even if you're not a part of the conversation, you can just see people like kind of giggling on the chair, being like, oh, this is fun. I've had multiple patients be like, I don't want to be done physio because it's fun coming here. Yeah. But I think part of like even handling like the identity crisis is keeping people in that feel of community. And what I used to try to do a lot is connect different people who have had ACL injuries and be like, hey, why don't you connect with this person? And conveniently, when it's an open concept setting like that, you can be like, oh, like Cole just tore his ACL, but that person's like 4 weeks ahead of you and look how good they're doing.
Right.
And so I think that also helps with the identity piece is like you feel like you're taken out of one community and that you're not like participating in your sport and around the team as much from where you were injured, but then trying to create your own new team with like the rehab side and feel like you're a part of something new so that every time they come in, they kind of look elated and look like they are a part of something new and that they're motivated. I think the physical kind of environment that you build has a lot to do with that beyond just like trying to motivate people and tell them things. I think putting them in that situation, letting it happen itself is kind of a nice kind of way to structure it.
Totally. Yeah, I know Cole feels that way. And even now, like he'll look at somebody. I dropped him off at school today, and there was somebody on like crutches. Her knee was all bandaged up. He's like, I've been there. It's just like you're part of this club almost now.
100%.
Yeah.
If we could turn this into an Oprah moment, though, and like stare deep into your soul.
Yeah.
Have you shared your story of failing the exam and having to go through that like dark period and that turning into something good, but have you had an identity shift like this, like that similar to what you're leading people through, that helps give you empathy to do it better?
Yeah, and I think stemming back to like high school, I was always a good athlete, like kind of like a multi-sport athlete that I could kind of play any sport and just naturally fit in well and do well. And so I think that was, if you were to ask any of my teachers from like elementary school on, if you were to ask them, say like, oh, what do you remember about Kyle? They'd talk about athletic achievement, even talking about not trying as hard in like the academic side of things. I don't think any of those people would have said like, oh, he's like super smart and has like did really well academically or achieved a ton on that side of the ball. So I think like my identity shift probably is like shifted more towards that now, and that I'm helping people from a professional role and something that takes a lot of kind of academic achievement to get to this point. It was, again, not being sitting here talking about me as a good athlete in high school and just resting on that, but trying to say, okay, how can I be good at something else? What does it take to be good at something else? And I think that continues for me every kind of like year that I'm in practice, and I'm always chasing after something new and kind of trying to achieve some new feat, just knowing that that's kind of motivation that keeps me involved and interested in it. So I think that's completely rewired my kind of identity, and I don't look at myself now the same way I did 5 years ago, and I continue to look at myself, hopefully 5 years from now, evolved a ton from this point, and being comfortable that identity should be kind of somewhat transient and not just like this stable thing that you anchor in and talk about for the rest of your life.
I'm having a hard time not going back into the Jim Collins book, but if it was like people who listen, we're not going to go.
Obsessed with this book, and he always brings it up.
We're going to save it for another conversation, but it's I think that ability to reinvent yourself is just huge. So I'm not even going to mention the book.
And I always go back to that. I don't know if you've seen that, like Matthew McConaughey, like Oscar speech, when he basically, the premise of it is he says, he like met some guy and he says like, oh, like I remember you had like all these like goals for yourself. And he's like, did you meet him? And he's like, what is your biggest goal in life? And he's like, oh, I want to be me like 5 years from now. And he is like, sees the same person years later. He's like, so are you them? And he's like, no. And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, that's like 5 years away from now. And he's like, but you said that 5 years ago. And he's like, yeah, the goal is to continue to chase your identity and try to like always be the person you want to be 5 years ago, but know that you're never there. And that same kind of element with like practice, life, parents, like everything, right? Yeah. So, and I think that's the perspective that like age and just experiencing more things helps with, is that like, yes, talking about physio practice is one thing, but like all the things that make you good as a physio and like as a business owner are the same things that make you good at other things in life. And it's like the same foundation and core values that kind of run across the board, not just something in this sphere that doesn't translate outside. So
that is a great takeaway. And I think we've become less every time we hit a milestone of success in our business. It's like, it always seems to be getting bigger. So that
keep pushing.
Yeah,
right?
Totally relates.
Can we talk a bit about these elite athletes that you work with for a minute? Because most people just kind of, we see interviews on TV and, it's kind of behind the scenes, but you get like a front row seat. You know a lot about the people that you're working with. So curious, what do these elite athletes like have in common? Is there something that makes someone elite, or certain habits and things that you've picked up on from meeting all of these people?
Yeah, I think the elite of the elite are truly just dedicated to a different level and have like an obsession about their craft. That's one thing. Obviously, like paired with remarkable like physical ability, in some cases just like unbelievable genetic gifts in their like physical stature, their size, things like that. But definitely like the idea like of not quitting when things get hard. And I can kind of quote, I remember asking Cam Reed, who's the Rangers captain, he's been drafted by Nashville. a little bit about kind of like what he kind of would see himself doing if he wasn't a hockey player. And he's like, I'd still be working in hockey. But he's like, the thing about hockey is he's like, I love it more than anything else in the world. And he's like, the thing I like most about it is that when things get really, really hard and I know that other people around me want to quit, he's like, that's the stuff I love the most. And and I think that's probably embodied by a lot of like professional hockey players, that idea that when things get tough, I'm just going to push harder. And again, making it relatable to everything else. It's kind of that way with business and stuff as well. I'd say maybe the most remarkable part is that there's a tier of athletes where people are very good athletes, but then the people who make it professionally, and especially the people who do it at an elite level, are genuinely really, really good people. And it finds a way to like filter itself out. And people are very respectful. And I'd say probably more genuinely nice than you'd imagine them being. And so I probably work with a lot of hockey players, so you see that a ton, but all the football guys are the exact same way. And so they're very, very appreciative of like what service you can provide and kind of the help that you're giving them. But they're very human. So I'd say that's probably the kind of most surprising thing for a lot of people.
You already traced this back a little bit, but maybe just to like go a little bit deeper on it. Like that idea of being obsessed with the craft or loving something that has you push through. Has that helped you in building your business? What have you taken as a direct lesson that you're applying to your work, just as you're building your business?
Yeah, I think definitely like it is tough and hard. And I think maybe the lesson that I feel relates the most to business that I've taken from some of the athletes is that you're often putting in like sweat equity and work that you're not guaranteed an outcome from. And so and same thing with like an athlete who's like out grinding, running 100-meter sprints or 40-yard dashes and trying to get faster. Like they could do all that work and it could turn out that they don't achieve their goal, right? And it could turn out that it turns out fantastic, but you're kind of like investing and taking like a gambling bet on yourself and the work you're putting in and knowing that that's how you do achieve that outcome, but it's not guaranteed. I think the same thing with business, right? You like invest a lot of time and even similar to what we mentioned earlier about kind of taking opportunities where there's not immediate gratification, but that it could turn into something down the road.
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing as like putting work in now that is going to happen down the road. And so I think maybe taking that lesson in that there's a lot of things that like I try to do now that you kind of throw it at the wall and you're like, yeah, sure, maybe one out of these 5 opportunities that I've tried to like put effort into are going to stick. And I hope that thing's huge for me. But realize that it's not valueless even if it doesn't have an outcome that you expect it to be down the road.
I think that's key. I love that as a takeaway. I just do it because I love it, or I do it because I think it's useful, or I do it because there's some benefit, but I'm not doing it for the benefit.
Yeah, and you see it in the hockey world a ton, right? Like if you look at the amount of players who like play AAA that make it to the professional like level, or you even filter that down to the OHL and then see how many of those guys make it to the professional level. Even as like the kind of pyramid gets tighter at the top, there's not tons of guys who make it all the way. But if you look at how many people are working at it to try to get there, it's remarkable. And because they would all know the odds, right? But continue to persevere through that and put the effort in. And so again, kind of going back to the idea of like falling in love with process rather than outcome. That's what all these guys are doing without like putting a name to it, right? And same thing in business is like trying to do the things that, you enjoy doing it because it's the process, but the outcome doesn't have to happen in order for you to get enjoyment out of it or feel fulfilled.
Can I go a little bit deeper into a recent example?
Yeah.
Because I'm interested in the idea of how pressure connects to this. So you were just out with the Kitchener Rangers in BC. I think you were the lead physio or lead trainer.
Physio. And so, they have their own athletic therapist, Nick, who's awesome. And then I support him. So I always say he's the boss. But I was out there helping them with physio stuff. Yeah. So
they're in the Memorial Cup, which is, the mecca for Canadian. It's not even Canadian junior hockey. It's like semi-pro. It's the big show. What was the response to some of these elite athletes to pressure? Everything you were talking about, the love of the process and all that. How does pressure factor into that?
Yeah, I think I got a pretty unique kind of view under the hood, being that a part of the team. I usually go in and help out periodically throughout the year. Usually like once a week I'm in there helping treat guys. But I think getting to see how the whole operation ran and get to see it over that length of time was really cool, all the way from like coaches down to players.
Yeah.
And I think one of the messages that they kept conveying, and it's been said in like some of the interviews afterwards, is that they stuck to their process and the way they had done things all year. And just because it was a big tournament, they didn't change how they did things. And so whether that was like how they handled off days or how they handled like morning skates, or whether that was like what their schedule was in the day when they showed up for video. And so having that routine that was familiar, I think was like a cool thing to see, because they very much were rinse and repeat. And I think that almost shelters people from feeling a little bit of the pressure, and that it just feels like another day. I think once you all of a sudden like create this new structure just because it's a big moment, it can start to feel like that. And so it was really cool. And I mean, you think about the ages of some of these guys, like they're aged like 16 to 20-ish. And they're able to handle immense pressure. Like if you look around the change room, like before the game, during the intermissions or after the game, like you'd have no clue like what the moment was about to be. Like they're very focused, but also know how to kind of like bring themselves down. And it kind of brings me back to the same idea that I once heard a quote that said something about how like elite athletes, the difference between being like a great athlete and elite athlete is that great athletes are able to like rise to the occasion and hype themselves up. Whereas like an elite athlete can keep themselves centered and grounded in those moments and doesn't have to worry about bringing themselves up. It's more so bringing themselves down. It's kind of that same idea that you need to have like focus, control, and be dialed in, but also keep things light enough and make it feel normal enough that it doesn't feel like it's something bigger than you can handle.
So good. I think Greg's taking tips for your house league coaching.
Oh my gosh.
There's a lot of pressure that was put on these young 10-year-old kids, and they cracked under the pressure.
Oh, it was a disaster. That is a whole other podcast conversation, but it's exactly that.
Yeah.
We got into the big game, the big moment. Yeah. We just had to make it through. And all season it was just running the system. And the players grew and the team got better and everything was working. Mm-hmm. And then we got to this one game, and the coaches, we all got into this, okay, we did it all different. Mm-hmm. Everything going into the game was different, and it was a disaster. Mm-hmm. I didn't even want to coach the third period. Kids on the bench were in tears. It was the exact opposite of following the process. So it's a great reflection back.
100%. Like even going through playoffs, like there were some other cool moments where like every time in playoffs, even if we were down a goal going into the intermission, like we'd look around at each other in like the training room and be like, doesn't it feel like we're going to win? And it was a weird feeling that like you're just so confident in the process that you're like, it just somehow feels like we're winning this game, even though you're down on the scoreboard. And even if you hadn't played great the period before, you just like trust that like the kind of gears are going to click and all of a sudden you're going to be going. And yeah, it was cool even in the Memorial Cup, like listening to some of the coaches talk with the players about, again, process is that like their system relies a lot on trust in other players fulfilling their role and having the trust and confidence that they're going to do what they are supposed to do. And the coaches have a lot of confidence that like the players are going to play the system that they want to play. One of the defining features is like watching the games qualitatively is our team was very, very good at like making other teams look less impressive. And it wasn't like a discredit to how good those other players were. There was exceptional players in other teams, but all of the work that goes in to kind of like suffocate some of the free space that they had or just take air out of the arena. And they were just playing a system that was like relentless and made it so that we just minimize other teams' kind of skill. And so it was cool. And that doesn't happen if somebody cheats. Like if somebody decides that they want to cheat and take off early, or if they want to try to like make a play for themselves, that doesn't happen. And like through the Memorial Cup, the coolest part was that like everybody committed and like sacrificed like what could be individual kind of gain for everybody. And at the end, you obviously get to win the trophy and kind of celebrate after. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah,
they
that was
won.
great.
They won, for those that don't know.
Yeah.
Good job.
So throughout the conversation, we've just been talking about injury, recovery, and setbacks. A lot of the people who listen to this, and even just for our own benefit, we have a lot of conversations about the people in their own businesses and the businesses they're trying to start. So if we can maybe kind of tie some of those threads together, if somebody comes to you and they're in an injured state, they're stuck in some way. How do you blend the focus of what recovery is going to be like with just getting them moving? Because you've had lots of success stories, but there's probably been people who've been trickier to work with. Mm-hmm. So when you have those people that maybe are just more stuck, how do you get people just moving if they're having a tough time?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of emphasis in the physio world about trying to. So there's a lot of emphasis on goal setting. So like setting short-term goals and like achievable goals, and I think trying to not look too far down the road. So ACL world is classic for this because you're looking at like a 9 to 12 month recovery in a lot of cases. And people are like, okay, well, when can I play sports? That's their first question they come back in, right? And their parents are like hovering in the chair and they're like, yeah, when can they get back? Because they like need to play sports. But
was I that parent? I was that parent.
I think every parent is that parent because you want to do the thing that like, again, is their identity, right? Yeah. And so it's like, when can we get our kid back to his identity or her identity? And I think looking at some of those like short-term goals and looking like in front of you and kind of like living where your feet are a little bit and trying to be like, okay, like today in the gym, how can I like win today? And how can I like make it so that what we're doing today, I can see the benefit of, and you just build on that and worry about like, okay, how can I achieve the goal for next week? And sometimes that as a physio is communicating that to the patient, being like, okay, by next week, we want to try to hit this, this, and this, and this. And so even when I have a patient come in with an ACL, instead of looking at 9 to 12 months, I say, okay, for the first 6 weeks, this is our goal. The next 6 weeks, this is our goal. And then the next 6 weeks, this is our goal. And creating that 6 by 6 by 6 week kind of progression, I think it gets them to narrow their view a little bit and say, okay, I'm just going to focus on the stuff in front of me, because the longer the timeline, the bigger it feels it's going to be. And usually what I suggest to patients in terms of like worrying about whether they're coming back at month 9 or 12 is do all the stuff that we need to do now. And by the time 9 to 12 months comes, you're going to feel that so much time has passed that decision's actually going to be really easy at that point. It's going to feel really hard and long right now. But every single patient I've had through Achilles and ACL, which are probably some of the longest rehabs, at the end has said it doesn't feel like it's been that long. But at the start, they're looking down the tunnel and they're like, that runway's huge. So I think relating it back to like a business kind of sense, like not obsessing too much. Yes, you have to have like long-term goals, but not obsessing too much at staring at those. Stare at the things in front of you and trying to conquer some of those. And then it doesn't feel too daunting and big, because by the time you do get to those like longer goals, it'll feel like time's kind of flown on, right? And it's the same thing, I'm sure, with your guys' kind of business. It feels like it's probably like just flew by, but it's probably been a lot longer than it sounds. So
yeah. And that's just everything that our Unblock Yourself program is about too. It's like this 8-week now program. It's like, hey, what can you get done in 8 weeks? Like, don't think about next year. It's like, what are these micro kind of goals, right? It's just to get moving. So yeah, there's a lot of parallels.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that maybe is a little relatable to business is that I always make the comment that my goal in like sports rehab is either to like push people to the goal or pull them back. And so trying to find that middle ground, and that a lot of the people I work with is trying to pull them back a little bit because they're naturally very active, motivated people. So it's trying to be like, okay, less is more in some instances. And we use the quote of like, take a step back to leap forward, and that sometimes doing a little bit less right now is actually going to get you further ahead a couple weeks from now. And in other cases, if you have somebody who's less motivated, you have to like push them to do a little bit more. And I think like the art of a good physio is finding out who's where and figuring out whether you're pushing or pulling at that moment. And it's the same thing in the business world as well, right? Like sometimes it's like, okay, you need to take a step back and you're doing too much right now and like emphasize and focus on X, Y, or Z. But there's other times where you're like, no, you need to go out and do a little bit more of this. So I think just figuring out, like being able to self-identify where you're at and then figure out whether you need to push or pull is probably one of the biggest takeaways that is relatable from the physio and business world.
I think it's brilliant.
If your high school teachers could see you now.
I think we can't let you go without asking this question, though. If you've got a clear vision on it, you think, I don't know where you think I'm going with this.
A joke is coming. But
No, it wasn't a joke. I was going to keep it totally on the rails. The jokes are going to come either when the mics are off or at the very end. What is do you have a 5-year? Could you articulate your 5-year version of you? Because we talked a little bit about that. You quoted McConaughey. You brought him into this room. Yeah. So what is your 5-year vision of you and where you're looking to go?
Maybe not so much like a definite 5-year plan. I think there's some like process things that I try to like hit. So I think maybe a recent evolution is that I've hired on a couple physios and hopefully hiring another one kind of later this year. And I think with them, it's been kind of a bit of a shift. I've like shifted my identity just a little bit away from worrying about me and trying to make sure that they're going to get the same experience as me. And so I've tried to make a point of making sure that like what their job ends up becoming and their experience is like the best elements of what mine has been. So I think as the next 5 years go on, it's trying to like enhance their experience and try to bring them to the same point that I've gotten to kind of get to. And it's not so much the accolades of like working with pro athletes. I think that's like a cool bonus to tie in, but just feeling like you're working a job that at the end of the day, you get to go home and you're like, that's sweet. Some of the most rewarding comments are from the physios that are working for me now is that they leave at the end of the day and they're like, it doesn't even actually feel like the day's been that long. And so I think just continuing that trend and trying to make sure that, I guess, maybe the physio service as a whole, and that's what's available to the community, that people get access to that. Because I think if you have physios who are feeling fulfilled, that you're naturally going to get a quality and product that the community is happy with, because they're going to be putting that much more effort into it. And I think even some of the model, we're trying to spend more time with patients. We're trying to like give them a more intricate and kind of close, in-depth look at how we can help them. So I think just continue to push that model along and hopefully expand so that more and more people have access to that, and then more and more physios can kind of work in that kind of setting.
Awesome. Well, this has been so great. Thank you. This was way more on the rails than I expected, and I really enjoyed it. So it was really nice to have like a serious conversation and see the two of you interact in a
we should try that again.
Non-sarcastic way.
I'm serious all the time.
We should try that again.
So if people want to check you out or maybe book you for some treatment, where can they do that?
So my clinic is called FP Sports Rehab, and we have a location in Waterloo and then one in Stratford, Ontario. And then my personal Instagram handle is Ferrigan.physio, and so both have the links to the booking site. And we have, myself and then a couple wonderful physios who are working there, and all trying to kind of conquer things in the same kind of angle.
And if you show up for an appointment without a proper pair of shorts,
yes,
it won't be the pink shorts, but hopefully you have some spares.
I might need to refresh that just to kind of get the feel back.
I think
there has been something missing, so maybe that was it.
I think there's something up on the wall or just like a bin.
Like rubber ducky, like, I don't know, shorts.
There's
got to be some ridiculous pair of shorts.
It's funny because they, I know like the seniors at a lot of the high schools around here play some like elimination game with squirt guns. And the only thing that like keeps you safe is with the goggles. And so people have been walking in with like pink goggles. And every time I think of it, I'm like, it kind of reminds me of the pink short thing. Like
totally.
They own it, which is great. Similar to you with your skinny legs. But
Hey, I think when I had my Achilles injury, you're like, focus on upper body. And I just have stuck with that as my core.
This is all you have left, so we're going to focus on that.
Hey, all the imaging is waist up, so I just,
That's
go with it.
Convenient.
Kyle, it's been awesome to have you.
Thanks
you for being here. We'll let you get off to meet up with your NHL client later this afternoon. Appreciate you being here. And
thanks for making the time.
Yeah, that's great.
Appreciate it. It was fun.
That's it for today. If you like this episode, hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you'd be willing to leave a rating or a review, we do read every single one. And it genuinely helps more people find the show and helps us keep doing what we're doing. And if you do like this episode and what we're talking about here, you'll probably love our 100% free bi-weekly newsletter. It's called the Vienna 5, and you can find the link to that in the show notes. Music for this podcast is by Moby, who we still think is very cool. We're glad you're here. Thanks so much for listening.